Good morning, everyone from Washington, D.C. My name is Vivian Salama. I am a national security correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and it is my honor to be with you all for the Bucharest Forum today. We're talking about strategic competition in the Asia-Pacific region, and when discussing the state of international relations and global balance of power, President Joe Biden's administration has increasingly been referring to strategic competition as opposed to former President Trump's great power competition. While the concept is still not fully developed, what is clear is that the relationship between the U.S. and regional Pacific allies on the one hand and China on the other hand is still marked with serious challenges. And so just to underscore what a global topic this is, I'm joined by leading experts around the world. We've got Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, who is a member of the National Security Advisory Board and Government of India and Director General of the Center of Contemporary China Studies, coming to us from Delhi. We have Roland Freudenstein, who's Vice President of GlobalSec. He's coming to us from Brussels. And Henry Huiyao Wang, founder and president of the Center for China and Globalization, who's joining us from Beijing. Alexander Downer over at King's College London is having some technical problems. We do hope he joins us at some point during our discussion. So gentlemen, let's just dive right in. The rise of China is something certainly dominates my time and energy these days as a reporter, as it does for a lot of policymakers here in Washington and around the world in your regions. And the Biden administration has been adamant that China poses a unique challenge to Western democracies, and it requires a unified response from the U.S. and its traditional allies. But that has been a little bit easier said than done. A lot of challenges in getting a lot of the Pacific allies to just wholeheartedly back what the Biden administration is doing. And so I'd like to hear from each of you just sort of briefly first, a minute or two in opening remarks about why this is such a challenge right now in 2021 and sort of what's dominating your thoughts at the moment on this issue. Lieutenant General, why don't you start?
Okay. Thank you very much, Vivian, and thanks Aspen Institute for giving me an opportunity to join this forum. It's wonderful to be here today. I would just mention 3 points. One is, China has got interests in the Southwest Pacific region. The reason is, one is the location is at the crossroads of shipping routes in this region. That is one thing. Second thing is the military value of some of these islands, like Tulagi, which witnessed World War II. The reported secret base in Tulagi by the Chinese is also come up in the media. So this is something that basically is there is a military interest. The third one is many of these countries were initially supporters of Taiwan, and China has tried to get them to its side. Like for example, the Solomon Islands and Kiribati are examples of that. Utilization of countries like Kiribati for placement of satellite tracking stations. So this is something which has been useful to China. And lastly, there are some resources that are there in this region which helps China's interests. So having said that, the second point I want to say is there are other players who are also interested in this region, like for example Australia and some other countries like US, etc. So that is the second aspect of it. And so this is the second player in this particular region. Third, I would like to do a little more on India's interaction in Pacific Islands. Now that is actually something, there is a forum for India Pacific Islands Cooperation called FIPIC or FIPIC. The 2 meetings have been held. The last one was held in 2015. The next one is going to be held next year in Papua New Guinea. And probably our president is likely to go to attend that meeting. There are other Indian initiatives, like for example, there is a cooperation for renewable energy. There are agreements on tourism, health and medicine. So these are some issues that we have been working with as far as these countries are concerned. And there have also been establishment of certain centers of excellence and IT centers in Fiji and Samoa have been handed over. In other countries, we are still working to do that. There's a 12 million grant which was given to these countries, basically for tiding over their problems with the COVID, and also a supply of vaccines to Fiji, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and some Solomon Islands has been done. So a lot of things like this have been done. And concession line of credit to the extent of $150 million has been also been offered to these countries. So these are some of the issues that we have been working on with these countries. And so the point I'm trying to convey is, it is not only China, there are other countries which are also interested in this region. And this is going to be an interplay that is still evolving and that is still going to develop over a period of time. I think I have finished my 2 minutes. I'll leave it for the others to talk about.
Thank you, General. Roland, so what do you think? Does this concept of strategic cooperation work when everyone's setting their own agenda?
Vivian, thanks, and dear colleagues, thanks for having me. I would even use a different terminology here. This is a systemic conflict, right? This is a competition of antagonistic political systems. This is democracy versus authoritarianism. That doesn't explain every little detail about the Solomon Islands and so on, which was very interesting. But it does explain the larger framework in which this competition is taking place. So instead of calling it either great power or strategic competition, I would call it a systemic rivalry. And this is the way also the European Union is increasingly defining its relations with China. Let me just maybe say two more points at this stage here. The American journalist Ann Applebaum has just come out with a really seminal article in The Atlantic a couple of weeks ago. The bad guys are winning. It is about what she calls autocracy incorporated. So this is like, autocracies across the world have learned from their mistakes, if you want, of 1989, of the color revolutions, of the Arab Spring. And they now have developed a model of clinging to power, which is largely free of classical ideologies. It is just autocracy. It is the contrary of democracy. Of course, sometimes mimicking democratic procedures. But, to claim that Russia is based on a constitution today or China is a multi-party system, as the two ambassadors of those countries just did in an op-ed piece, it's a bit of a bad joke, I would say. So Ann Applebaum says in this article, democracies have to get together, have to get their act together, have to be more united and exchange best practices, how to defend their democracy and the rule of law at home, and how to push back globally, and East Asia is part of this very much, against the authoritarian cooperation that we see. And the conference, which is going on as we speak, the Summit for Democracy, to which President Biden has invited countries, governments, NGOs, civil society representatives, that's a first step. But that's this is more the beginning than the end of a development. And I'm pretty optimistic that democracy will prevail. It's just going to take a little bit longer.
Thank you for that. Henry, you are sitting in Beijing. What is your view from where you sit?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Vivian, and also all the panelists for discussion. But I think that maybe we have to look at things a little differently because we are now in a pandemic of the big crisis of the century. I think since the Second World War, we have a Bretton Woods system which carried us until today, largely prosperous and peaceful. But now we are having the worldwide virus broke out. I think we need to really think about the system we are in. When Bretton Woods system set up, there's only 2.5 billion global population. Now it's 7.8 billion. It's grown, largely, out of the proportion of the older system. So I think that we need to upgrade, enhance. It's not really makes sense to say which system is better and which system is inferior. But let's compare the performance, basically. That's, I think, the bottom line. And Center for China Globalization, my think tank, we just held a 6th annual Global Think Tank Innovation Forum. I had invited Brookings and Council of Foreign Relations and the Peterson Institute and a number of the think tank people on the chat. But basically, there's a voice from the think tankers to say, let's measure the effectiveness of democracy. China also has international forum national democracy, and also more than 120 country representatives participated in the last 2 weeks. But I think now we need to upgrade the concept of democracy as well. Now we have, in China, there's a selection, there's a meritocracy, there's a talents picking system, thousands of years of that. It's kind of a selective democracy as well, and consolidated democracy, but also that, we have a market democracy. China is practically market economy, and everybody's, where to buy, where to go, what to do is always voting every day with the mobile phones and wallets, of course. And also we have this technology democracy, social media, all kind of WeChat and what have you. So in technology upgraded, decision making has been really more scientific and decision and more accurate. So it's not really necessary going to the 2005 years old model. When it's a agricultural society, everybody has to really rely on a one man one vote to decide. But also we see the democracy has getting into opposite for the opposite's sake, and that really not effective. And so I think the system China has. I mean, in the long haul, let's have a peaceful competition. I agree, it's a competition, but not necessarily confrontation. So no matter Quad or strategic Indo-Pacific or AUKUS, I mean, U.S. and Western countries busy building security alliances. China is busy building RCEP, trying to join the CPTPP, and then China just celebrating 20 years of joining WTO. Let's really working on those economic benefit for the peace and the security of this region, rather than we set up all the security concept. I hope that Indo-Pacific can become an economic and trade and cooperation framework rather than a security framework. So I really hope that I had a lunch with the Indian ambassador here in Beijing. I mean, that was not necessarily a military alliance, but let's have a more economic element to that. And China could be part of Indo-Pacific arrangement. It used to be Asia-Pacific, not Indo-Pacific. That's great. I mean, let's expand the sphere of cooperation. Let's do that.
Yeah, can I just say one thing about performance?
Please do.
Sorry, Vivian. Just one sentence about economic performance. Look at Taiwan. I mean, fantastic economic performance, but freedom for the citizens, a vibrant liberal democracy, and they achieved that by themselves. There was no CIA coup or something like that installing democracy in Taiwan. They just became a democracy by themselves, and I think it's a fantastic example of how a society with a Chinese culture can actually build democracy and be economically performing.
Well, I just want to just react to one sentence as well. Actually, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Taiwan accounts 1/3 of China's GDP. Now it's less than Shenzhen, one city. And also the income and the livelihood improvement is largely behind mainland already. You probably not talking the old story now. Taiwan is falling behind mainland in many ways already. I mean, it's been falling behind Hong Kong and falling behind mainland already, falling behind Shenzhen. Not true. What's saying is not true.
I want to see those figures, man. I mean, the speed of growth, of course, is faster on the mainland, but the average personal income is still higher in Taiwan than in China. Excuse me.
No,
let's stick to the facts, Henry.
There are 2 million Taiwanese working in the mainland, making big income. Better the salary of starting salary in Taiwan is already falling behind starting salary in China now. College graduates, that's already falling behind.
I think we're going to agree to disagree on this issue, but I do want to kind of hone in on one economic issue in particular, which has really come to light, certainly from Washington and the rest of the Europe, is the Trump administration tied so many issues related to technology and trade to national security, and especially when it came to China. And there were concerns about that. He cracked down on companies like Huawei, and took other measures, including some crippling tariffs on China, which was very controversial at the time. But surprisingly, the Biden administration has chosen not to roll back those tariffs. And these issues are increasingly becoming a bipartisan issue. And so I'm curious, where do you see this going, in terms of this sort of strategic competition on the economic side? Are we talking punitive tariffs? Do you see a light at the end of this tunnel? How does it play out? And especially, I'd be interested to hear about where you see the allies, especially in the Pacific and in Europe, in the middle of all of this, where they are, on the one hand, agreeing that there are some problematic elements with regard to Chinese technology and trade practices, but also caught between a rock and a hard place because they need Chinese trade.
Who should go first?
Just give a quick...
those countries.
Let me. See, first thing is, I do understand what the discussion is about on the ideological issues. But if you put it in the time frame, before ideology came strategy competition. You look at Obama's second administration, wherein he did the pivot and the reorientation. From that time onwards, you see this. You talked about technology and trade tariffs, etc. Despite the tariffs being imposed on China, the trade balance between China and US hasn't changed really much. The trade surplus that China was enjoying, it is still enjoying even today. So I don't know where that tariff issue is going. As far as the entities list is concerned, there have been new additions to the entities list which US has brought in about. But notwithstanding that, what I personally feel is the strategic competition in South Pacific also has got augmented by the AUKUS coming into play. AUKUS is one more thing that you need to be looking at, and that is something that is going to have a little bit of more military content as far as this area is concerned. So this is a third factor that we need to work around. Despite Quad and Indo-Pacific, I'm very happy to hear Mr. Wang saying that they are willing to join Indo-Pacific. Till about a few days ago, I don't think they were even comfortable with saying Indo-Pacific, the term Indo-Pacific. Now, of course, in the China-ASEAN joint statement, for the first time, they have said that they will support the ASEAN's view on Indo-Pacific. So I'm happy that if it is coming around, and I'm sure Indo-Pacific has been very clearly spelled out as an economic and a developmental kind of an issue. Similarly is the Quad. So these are issues that we need to probably look into a little more. But I think it is more of a strategic competition that started. If you put the timelines in place, you will find that there's more of a strategic competition. Now it is probably getting somewhere into this ideological issue, which is also getting enmeshed with the strategic competition.
Well, if I can come in here about punitive tariffs, look, you could always make an argument that without those trade defense measures, as I would call them, the trade imbalance would get even worse, or the chances of enterprises in Europe and the United States would be even worse. The fact is that we need a level playing field in our economic relations, and we don't have it now. China has a bunch of state-owned enterprises that have unlimited access to capital and therefore can outcompete any private Western company on either the Chinese market or even other markets across the world. We have forced technology transfer, we have copyright issues, we have a whole bunch of economic problems that we need to solve in negotiations. And if you want to negotiate credibly with someone else, you need to have trade defense measures either at the ready or in action, just to show that you mean business. I think that's completely normal. And by the way, this is the way things are going also in Europe, in the European Union, vis-a-vis China.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I can share my view as well. Yeah. So Vivian, you talk about this tariff and why U.S. is not rolling back, and Biden is in awkward position. Hasn't maybe inherited a lot of Trump's policies on China. I think he was really facing a very dilemma. I mean, those tariffs are terrible. It was added to the American consumers. This so-called trade deficit is really a myth, because a lot of the things China just made a labor cost. For example, an Apple phone selling US $1,000, China probably made $50, but then half of the price probably counted on China's surplus, because China didn't have those or spare parts or design or brand or whatever. but that really was a myth for a long time. I think the U.S. business community is fed up with this tariff, and the chambers and calling for really get off that. And all the U.S. EU chambers has continued to confidently want to invest in China. Majority wants to stay in China. Nobody wants to live in China. China is the largest, going to be a middle class. Already have a 400 million middle class already. So the fundamental problem, the dilemma you said, I think for President Biden is that, since President Trump as well, the U.S. it's been a long issue is this widening gap between rich and poor. 1% of Wall Street, is equal to the wealth of almost 50% of the mass population. For the last 30 years, the middle class income rises zero, flat. So they were constantly voting those anti-globalization, anti-China politicians into the Congress. So and then they blame China for that. So I think the problem that Biden is starting to tackle is international corporate minimum tax. So all those U.S. companies making huge money, they're going to send it back to benefit the Midwest and the Rust Belt. So they were voting less anti-globalization politicians to the capital of Washington. So then China will be off the hook. Now, China is the easy target, is the election issues. Anything goes wrong, China. So, but probably U.S. should solve its own problem. China realized that. China lifted 800 million people out of poverty in the last 40 years. Now China proposed common prosperity just to prevent those gaps. China going to create the middle class in the world. It's going to be 500 million, 600 million. As time goes on, as one 5-year plan after another 5 years plan. Constantly working on it. Let's measure by the performance, not by the ideology. Yeah.
I do want to hit a little bit on military issues, but just to be clear, the Biden administration does maintain that a lot of the IP theft and other things that were agreed upon in phase 1 have not yet been rectified. And so that's why they continue with the tariffs until they see some of those measures changed. But it is something definitely that, again, there are a lot of disagreements between Washington, Europe, and China on that issue. I do, because of our time being so short, I need to abruptly switch over to military issues, and particularly the Pentagon said last month that China is rapidly expanding its nuclear arsenal and could have 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030, part of its ambitious military buildup. And so I'm curious to hear from all of you. And of course, we just touched upon Taiwan. We're definitely going to get back into that here. What's the end game for China here? Is it a tool for some leverage in its talks with other countries, or is there really risk of a nuclear war, as a lot of people in capitals around the world are now fearful with regard to Taiwan and some of China's recent actions?
Can I go first?
Please do. Jump right in.
Yeah, thank you. China has stated its goals very clearly. In the 2006 Defense White Paper, when they brought it out, they had a 3-step process of 2010, 2020, and 2050. Then, of course, came the 2 centenary goals of 2021 and 2049. By 2035, that they want to become the modernized armed forces in the entire world, in modernized armed forces. And by 2049, they want to become they want to have armed forces which are capable of winning wars in the modern world. So that is the way they have already spelled it out. And this modernization of the PLA is nothing new. It has been happening for quite some time, since 1993 onwards. If you look at it, it has been happening. So my point here is that what China is aiming is to become a modern world, a modern country with a developed society by 2050, with the ability to support its interests all over the world with its own armed forces. So that is where it comes up. And therefore, you will find that the not only the platforms, you will find the joint fighting capability and the integrated operations capability will improve, and they will try to become the modernized armed forces which are capable of winning wars anywhere in the world. That is what they are aiming, and that is what they are progressing. On the nuclear front, actually they have actually seems to be graduating from the minimum deterrence that they were talking about earlier, with these silos which have been located recently which you mentioned about. These silos are actually indicative that there are more number of warheads that are going to come up. And supported by what Pentagon said, you find the numbers are going to increase, and that is going to become a cause of concern. But however, traditionally, nuclear warheads or nuclear weapons have been weapons of deterrence. They have not been weapons of war fighting. That is something that we need to keep in mind. Even at the height of the Cold War, you found, even though thousands of nuclear warheads were deployed by both the sides, it didn't escalate to the extent of war fighting. But that can't be ruled out in future. But this is something which is actually a dangerous trend. And I think we should start working towards more of disarmament than creating more of silos and more of nuclear warheads.
Roland, what do you think? Do you think? Yeah, please.
Look, it's not the modernization of forces per se that's a problem. It's what countries do with these forces. What is China doing in the Taiwan Strait? A record number of airspace violations, of direct military threats, coupled with rhetoric which says, yeah, well, there should be unification and it might even be not completely peaceful. I'm simplifying here, but this is the development we've had over the last years. So that is a threat, and that is a problem for the entire rest of the world. And one more thing about Russia, because it was also in this list of topics for this debate here. The latest worry for the democracies in the world is a scenario that is lovingly called the dragon bear. Now, what could that be? The dragon bear would be a scenario in which China attacks Taiwan or takes some of the islands like Quemoy or something in the Taiwan Strait. And at the same time, we have a Russian military aggression in Ukraine. I mean, expanding Russian military aggression in Ukraine because it's ongoing all the time as we speak. So that's the dragon bear thing. And, I can only say one thing. We are aware of this in the West, and the conclusion can only be better defenses, better deterrence, while maintaining a dialogue with the other side. That is the conclusion here. But we will not let down our guard. And there are some really, really bad scenarios ahead of us.
Henry, I definitely want you to chime in, but also if you can add to it, can President Xi Jinping afford a war? There are a lot of domestic risks involved in any kind of war, and China has seen decades of peace. The economy has really turned around in recent years, and so that element of it also kind of quite raises a lot of eyebrows here in Washington about, why would he want to get into a war? But all signs seem to be pointing in that direction.
Nobody wants to get in war. I think the president doesn't want to have a war at all. Doesn't want to have a war. Absolutely. I mean, China.
But then why does it seem to be that all signs seem to be pointing in that direction?
Let me explain. China now is becoming the global supply chain center to the world. China's import-export hit a new historical record high. The shipping company exec told me all the container going out of China is full and coming back is most of it empty. China is really supplying and stabilize the world. I mean, now people won't have a nice Christmas because there's a lot of Christmas gift cannot be sent on time from China. I think the issue is absolutely important. I mean, China is merely defensive. We see hundreds of warships, navies sails through Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. China is basically responding, talking about nuclear heads. U.S. and Russia have many more thousands more than China. China maybe have 300. U.S. has several thousand. And let me give you one number. China has actually 2/3 of the global high-speed railway length. Total length of the China's high-speed railway is equal to the next 10 countries combined, whereas U.S. military budget is equal to the next 10 countries combined. So you see who is doing military and who is doing peaceful prosperity building. China launched the BIN to help countries. So let's not really, confuse, all those concepts. China is basically merely defensive. AUKUS is already nuclearized. China, you can't expect China sitting still doing nothing. If U.S. already sending congressmen, officials, military personnel to Taiwan, break the three communique and commitment when they establish diplomatic ties with China. You expect what China to do? They have to respond.
Based on your view, then, sir, why are so many countries, in your view, misreading China's intentions with regard to Taiwan? Because it seems to be quite a consensus that Taiwan is at risk. A number of countries signaling that.
Yeah. The narrative is not really great. I mean, China is rising so fast that a lot of people is not feeling comfortable. There's a Hippies trap concept going on. I'm talking to Graham Allison often on that. And also China, the mother tongue is not English. In China, the international narrative is dominated by the Western media. So China merely in defensive, basically. They can't influence the global opinions. I mean, also U.S. President launched this trade war. It's trying to change the narrative of the whole Western community world, even though people don't like Trump. But his legacy, populism will continue, and he may come back to the USA.
Well, if I may just say something, what is happening across the Taiwan Strait? In fact, I think that today Taiwan and its allies are defending the One China principle against the Chinese Communist Party. That is what's happening, right? The Chinese Communist Party is now openly advocating unification against the will of the Chinese people, against the will of the Taiwanese people. And at the same time, they're hinting at using military means for doing this. This is a double violation of the One China principle, which insists on any change. The One China principle is the continuation of the status quo unless there is consensual change on both sides and if it's peaceful. So this is what is actually happening, but in a fantastic act of dialectics. Henry, you are presenting every Chinese move as defensive. Well, that's not the way we see it, and it's not the way the Taiwanese.
Roland, you're right. If Taiwanese authority would recognize one China policy, we will be happy ending. When Kuomintang, President Ma Ying-jeou in power, China flooded with Taiwan with millions of tourists, students. We almost have a peaceful reunification. President Xi and President Ma met in Singapore. That's a great process. But President Tsai Ing-wen has refused.
Henry, why is it over?
Huh?
Why is the bromance over?
The romance is over because the DPP is pro-independence. It's part of China.
And why are they? And why are they being elected?
Well, they're being elected. I think, they almost lose their midterm election to KMT. But I think they're being elected because they are at the crisis of Hong Kong. That's where you get elected. But now the Hong Kong is back to normal. I mean, sure, the DPP will lose the election.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, General, I want to bring you in too, because obviously these are concerns for India too, which is kind of relatively in the neighborhood between border skirmishes and concerns over nuclear issues. There is a concern of an aggressive expansion of China from where you sit in India too.
Yeah, you see, let me just handle this Taiwan issue a bit for a second. The unification of Taiwan has always been said by China. What has changed is the ambiguity between whether it is a peaceful unification or a non-peaceful kind of reunification is something, the ambiguity has come in. And the kind of ADIZ violation that is happening has not actually helped to resolve that particular thing. And in between, in certain statements, etc., the word peaceful reunification, the peaceful word goes missing, and that gives rise to a lot of other doubts in the minds of people. So there are a lot of issues in this. The reason why this is happening is, though the Chinese, most of the writings say what Henry says, that, the Taiwan is upping the ante and so we need to do this. That's a different issue. But the problem is that where does this all lead us to? That is what's worrying people at this point in time. So this is something that we need to be looking at, and probably the Chinese also need to look at it in some kind of a balancing factor. That is something that they need to do. The second thing about the aggressive behavior. The aggressive behavior has not started something new. It started with the plane incident, the spy plane incident in 2001. Thereafter, you found the South China Sea getting more and more, I would say, to the extent of militarization of those reefs that have been claimed back. That aspect has been going on. Busing of the ships, fishing vessels of the Philippines, pushing the Natuna Islands, pushing the Indonesians and the Natuna Islands, the claims in the Malaysian, also busing the exploration vessels in Malaysian territory. All these things have not actually helped people to say what Henry is saying, that China has been defensive, etc. So the thing is, I think Henry can probably answer this as to why this change in behavior of China towards the aggressiveness, and that is what is making people uncomfortable. If you can explain that, I think most of the things will fall into place.
Well, we have maybe about a minute and a half left, and I want to give you all, since we started a few minutes late, I want to give you all about 30 seconds for some closing thoughts, just in terms of this issue broadly, and if there's any points you didn't make, but we have to be brief. Henry, why don't you start us off?
Thank you. I think the question that raised exactly why China become like that. China actually is growing, expanding economically in the last 4 decades, and China's contribution, China become the second largest economy, largest trading nation with 130 countries, second largest United Nations. So China is growing up now. So people view China as always in the past, very quiet, doesn't really the boat, very obedient. No, I mean, China. So you have to expect some adjustment there. So I think that there's a little bit of adjustment to be done, and we have to really maybe gradually accept that, recognize that, because China also make 1/3 of the global GDP growth. So we have to really live to the reality and have a peaceful coexistence between all of us.
Thank you, Roland. Why don't you go next?
Sure. Look, don't rely too much on economic figures to measure whether democracy or autocracy have the better chances in the future. I mean, there is the power of ideas. And I mean, from Hong Kong to Moscow to Minsk to Caracas to Yangon today, hundreds of thousands of the best and brightest young people are risking their careers, their personal liberty, and often enough, even their lives, to live in a democratic society. And as long as I don't look out the window and I see 1 million people demonstrating for one-party rule in the streets of Brussels, I would say we have a fighting chance in this. So I drink to that, Henry.
General, finish this off.
I have two points. One is this strategic competition is not going anywhere. It is going to be there with us for some time. We all have to think about how to handle this. That is point number one. Point number two is, if what Henry says is right, if I am economically powerful, economically well-developed or a powerful guy, or I've got resources, that doesn't mean that you have to exert that power outwardly and then create issues. So that is something that we need to be keeping in mind. These are the 2 points I thought I'd leave it with you.
Thank you so much, and thanks to the Bucharest Forum. Hot topics will spur hot discussions, as you saw today, but a very important one, and I'm sure something we'll be talking about in the days and years to come. So thank you so much to all our panelists, and everyone have a great weekend.